to another episode of Rooted and Restored. We're super grateful that you're here with us today. As always, we bring content that feels relatable to the clients that we're serving. And today I get to be here with Callie. Back to the normal.
Yes.
The only thing that's not normal is we're holding our microphones today. Thanks, Christian. But nonetheless, this podcast is for you. And it's for anybody that's in relationship, anybody that is thinking about being in a relationship, anybody that might be in a relationship that is considering separation or divorce. Maybe you're fantasizing about what it might not look like or what it might look like to be with a different person or be independent. We're going to talk about relationships, the ruptures in relationships, dysfunction, and we're going to take this as far as we can. It might turn into multiple episodes. This is the work I get to do every day as a couples therapist, and I want to invite you into our room. I want to invite you into the conversations we have as a way of just maybe exploring yourself, those around you, and maybe what's going on in your mind, in your body, and everywhere else. Mm-hmm. So, welcome, Callie.
Yes.
Everybody, my name's Lisa Rowe. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the clinical director, the CEO, and primarily our couples and family therapists. So we're going to start with a few questions and really just invite you into this space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So piggybacking off of what you said, with you really working with primarily like a lot of couples or dynamics like that, I think going with like Rooted's theme and how we operate and not staying on the surface level. So, right, I'm sure you have many different dynamics and situations that you hear of when couples choose to walk into your room, but what do you feel like are some of the underlying or deeper rooted patterns or things that you see when they're walking in with ruptures, or they're in moments of like, we don't know what to do and this is where we're coming because we have no other solutions, like between the two of them?
That's a great point, Callie, and I do think that that's worth just expounding upon because, right, we have people coming in here arguing about food or the groceries they purchased or how they picked up their child or how they conversated with the other family member at a holiday party or something like this. And most likely, I would say 99% of the time, it's not about that incident that brings them into, the therapy room. It seems to be that way for them. We just can't get along. We can't agree on things. I don't like the way he parents. I don't like the way she does this, that, or the other thing. But normally it's something way deeper. We have a really interesting pathway to relationships, and a lot of times people don't understand that. We often pick relationships that remind us of our primary caregivers. Our nervous system loves familiar. Even if we say things like, I never want to be like my mom, I never want to be like my dad, I can't wait to move out of this house, or I never want to be fill in the blank, we almost always, our nervous system seeks that familiar space. And so we are likely attracting that same dysfunction we experienced as a child, and we're being triggered time and again. And so oftentimes whatever might be on the surface is something way deeper: abandonment, rejection, a trauma wound, fear, control. All of these things are usually underneath the surface.
Do you feel like, because I do feel like Rooted does approach things a lot differently, like I hear, right, like you are going back to what's deeper, right? What wounds have you faced in childhood that's leading you to have some of these dysfunctional behaviors with your partner, that they're triggering you in different things? Do you feel like you meet a lot of resistance in like the therapy office with like going back, or do you feel like there's a lot of willingness, or it really just depends on the dynamics?
Great question, Cal. I actually feel like people feel relieved when they don't feel stupid about the conversations they're having, when they can see that I know that talking about the groceries or talking about the way we discipline our children or talking about these very silly, stupid things has something more connected to them. There's so much relief when we have that beginning conversation. They're like, oh, there is something more to this. I'm not going crazy. And there does seem to be some version of them that can connect to, okay, I get that.
That makes sense. There's like relief to it. It doesn't feel like it's staying at the surface and it's just repeating the same things over and over and over again, because most likely you're arguing or having disagreements about the same thing, just in different patterns.
Most people come to therapy sick of the patterns, sick of staying on the surface, and want more support, they don't maybe know that they're asking for what goes deeper than that, which is a question I love to ask in our sessions, but they're looking for that answer. They just don't know it yet.
Do you feel like a lot of couples come willingly together, or do you feel like you get one that's maybe a little bit more willing and one that's a little bit more avoidant or guarded, or how's that typically like flow in session?
That's a great question. So often what I see in our sessions is people have come to their very last straw. They've tried everything in their power. They've tolerated as long as they can, and they're just at their wit's end. Therapy is not something that most people invite in as a preventative experience. Some of my clients who like to do the work and understand how beneficial it is do, but it's very rare. Most of the time I'm meeting couples or families in a state of crisis.
I think something that I feel like I see like pretty common, or I think is like a common like theme, not necessarily with the divorce, but sometimes it's about, I feel like in this day and generation, it's very big for like healing and working on yourself. And I do think it is preached a lot that like you have to be like healthy and whole yourself before being able to find a partnership or have your partnership like thrive. I guess what's your take on that with like being in the room with like sometimes having two people that are broken or are being extremely triggered or haven't healed some of these childhood wounds? How do you feel like, I guess, your stance is on that?
Gosh, that's more your generation, by the way.
Yes, I know.
So I love that you're even referencing that, because it is speaking to the 20-somethings today that like, yeah, be your best self. And all of this is maybe also why we're seeing people delay commitment in relationship, maybe why we're seeing people pursue their career and different experiences, because there is this place inside of our culture right now that is saying that. What I would say is that it's a lot easier to do the work individually than it is in couples work. Relationships is where the real work happens, and oftentimes you can't see those broken places until they're being mirrored back to you in relationship. We've talked about this before on this podcast, but I think it's really important to just say it again. We are mirrors for our partners, friendships, and it's the most intimate relationships that do this. So even right now, Callie, you and I have mirrors maybe on our hearts, if we can metaphorically see that, right? Like you are seeing parts of yourself as I'm even talking to you right now. Maybe it's subconscious, but you're hearing things in this conversation that resonate with you, that amplify things that you love about yourself, but you're also maybe feeling challenged, or things are being reflected back to you that maybe you're like, oh boy, that's something that I don't want to look at. And the same thing for me. In this relationship, you're mirroring things back, and I'm looking at you and I'm like, man, I'm proud of her. Gosh, this is cool to be her stepmom. Like, this is awesome being able to do this with you. And then there's parts of me that are looking at you and I'm being reflected other things, right? And so that's the same thing that happens in the relationship. So yes, be the whole version of you, do your work. Absolutely agree with that. But the real work actually happens when these mirrors are being reflected back to you and you're seeing parts of yourself. It's what you do when you see those parts of yourself that truly allows us to understand ourselves. And then also, like, can you be vulnerable with that person? If I was triggering you right now, and Lisa, what you just said, man, that's like going deep for me. That's security in relationship. But if I said something to you and you're like, holy cow, I'm going to stuff that down, I can't handle that, or now I'm angry at you, Lisa, for doing that, that's when we worry about what's going to happen next in relationship. And you've heard me say this before too, but 95% of what goes on in our world until we're awakened happens in our subconscious, which means it's not known to us. We say, like, it's like being a robot. How many times has somebody asked you, like, why do you do that? And you're like, I don't know. Well, that's true, but you do know underneath the surface. It's been taught to you, it's been learned, there's a story, a narrative, something underneath the surface that's directing that. And it's not until we become awakened that we understand why we do those things. And that's what relationships offer us if we allow it.
Well, I think even from what you're saying on that, it's so hard to pause in life and be curious about why are you repeating this same behavior, right? Or just going about things without sitting with curiosity. And I think sometimes that can happen in relationship dynamics too, right? Like, life's busy, right? You add kids to it, you add a dog to it, you add work, you add all these other aspects, and it's just like you have a routine or a pattern you're repeating, and you don't allow for space for pause to be intentional with each other or ask those hard questions, or it's like, oh, I had a long day, like what's the purpose in bringing up this huge thing that I know is going to be an argument and it's 9 p.m. like I don't want to deal with it.
Absolutely. And I think that really stems into, or brings me into a conversation about, a lot of times it wasn't like this at the beginning, I hear, or I didn't see these red flags, he wasn't like this, she wasn't like this. Well, because a lot of times we're putting our best foot forward, we're motivated by getting to know each other, it's sparkly and shiny if you're having sex or engaging in other behaviors that are creating intimacy and connection. We have what I call like a sex potion. It's almost like it creates this like blur or fog. It kind of doesn't allow you to see all the maybe red flags. Maybe they're yellow or orange, right? And so it offers us that space, usually the first 18 months of a relationship like that. And so it isn't until we start to get into the regular everyday experiences that we start to understand that, like, oh, there's work here, which often allows me to also say, are you in this relationship to be happy and excited all the time? Or do you see this relationship as offering transformation, connection, security? And that's where things also have to shift inside of people's hearts and minds. Because if you're in a relationship to be happy, then you probably are going to be somebody who serial dates people and, you know, enjoys the 18 months, takes a little break, and then enjoys an, or, you know, whatever that looks like, because relationships truly aren't about creating happiness when we're talking about it in this work kind of mode.
Well, I mean, it's somebody you're choosing to do life with, right? And life isn't always like an uphill battle, right? It goes up and down and up and down. So 100%, you can't be happy all the time. Like, your partner's going to be with you in some of your darkest moments, like losing your parents or whatever trials and tribulations that come across you in life. So if you're not able to sit in those moments and have really dark moments with a partner, you are going to struggle.
Absolutely. And that's important too to understand, you know, for those people listening that are thinking like, okay, I am fantasizing about leaving, or I've thought about divorce for a long time, or I don't want to be in this relationship but I don't know what's next, or I'm afraid to leave, or maybe I just want to see what's next. You know, there's a couple things to think about. Number one, I am not saying stay if you are being hurt, if there's chronic addiction, if there's an unwillingness to change, right? This conversation is an entirely different conversation if that's what's coming up. But if your partner's willing to change, or there's an openness, back to your conversation about like, do people come willingly? If you have a partner showing up in this room, even if they're afraid of, because you've threatened divorce, it's worth sitting in it and exploring what's going on. Because like I tell everyone, if you don't do the work now, you will have to do it in another relationship, right? Back to what we talked about earlier. Individual work is beautiful, but it's put to the test in relationship. And so this is, I always recommend that as a couple therapist. Like, divorce hurts everybody. Separation hurts everybody. If the relationship is something that is worth working on for both people, it's worth seeing what is possible through therapy and other sources of help.
Yeah. And like you said, right, your childhood like is going to trigger every single relationship you end up in. So being able to be the mirror for yourself and reflect inward, whether you work on that relationship in that, or work on yourself in that relationship, or you do need to exit that relationship and do some work on yourself, there has to be some form of work or healing that you do so the next relationship you enter into, or if you continue that relationship, you choose to be able to show up differently.
Yeah. And Cal, what I would say as a couples therapist is it's best done in that relationship. If you have two people, even if one is more resistant than the other, if there is a willingness to at least show up to therapy and start the process, it is better to do it in relationship, because the things that you or my partner or a significant other will do in relationship are not often things that we experience like in our work relationships or with our children. It's often very different when we're in partnership with somebody.
I think the same, like, what comes to my mind even is, like, a lot of times even in couples or individual or family work in the therapy room, you do all this work, all this healing, all these things that you talk and process through, but they have to go out into the real world, right, and put those things into practice. They can't put it in practice in the therapy room. Then they come back and they're like, okay, like, I did this and this is what happened, and you process through it. So it's the same thing. If you're not in that partnership, you can do work individually, but inevitably, even if you chose to exit that relationship, when you enter another one, there is still going to have to be some work that's done. You always have baggage and you have to unload it and see if you can work through it.
Yeah, and that's what sometimes has to be revealed for clients in our rooms, because I hear a lot, hey, I'm doing the work, I don't need him, I'm going to just go on my own. And it's like, but what is still causing that uproar inside of you? What's causing that reaction inside of you? That's your work. And it almost feels like sometimes that's a threat to them. Like, hey, I'm asking you to sit with that, whether he changes or not, whether she changes or not. It's about you learning what is that triggering inside of you, what's causing you to engage in this back and forth situation, and how do you need to grow, because that's where it happens. And you actually start to develop this understanding that in our work, that I need my partner to trigger these things, so that I can sit with myself in a way that I haven't yet sat with myself and understand what's going on. Again, it needs to be reiterated. Not if you're being abused, there's chronic addiction, chronic violence. I'm not suggesting that. But if it's because he doesn't have the emotional bandwidth, or she's very aggressive with her words and these sort of things, that becomes a mirror to you to say, like, how do I sit with this? How do I have a conversation from my regulated place? And how do I not let this dysregulation dysregulate me? And that's when we stop the cycle.
So even when you're doing that work in the therapy room, right, and individuals are having those like awakening moments or aha moments, and they're working through those things, sometimes, at least to me, it sounds like the goal, even if it is to reunify the relationship, sometimes that might not happen, right?
Absolutely, because growth requires change, right? And sometimes that growth illuminates things that maybe they've been avoiding looking at, maybe, things that they still struggle with. And so sometimes the repair is the individual repair. Sometimes the repair is exiting the relationship with more of an objective, transformative understanding, less about this reactive emotional exit, which is always healthier if children are involved, if there's a business involved, if there's other things involved.
Well, right, because every separation or divorce looks different, but when you are leaving it with a lot unsaid, or a lot of anger, resentment piled up, and you're still having to navigate parenting together, all these things that are intertwined with each other, it just causes more reaction and all these things that you haven't navigated because it hasn't been addressed.
Right. And you used a really good word, reaction. It is my goal as a therapist to slow everything down, that we become less reactionary and more responsive. When we take a 24-hour timeout, when we can respond from a more intellectual place than an emotional place, we always have more ability to see a lot more than what we see in the moment. And so many people come into your room, my room, our work, and they're reacting to these emotionally explosive experiences. And so that's a response of our nervous system being triggered by previous experiences, old wounds, all of these experiences that we're talking about today. And so we want to slow that down, and that's where the healing really starts, because if we can realize what's being triggered and realize that's our work, well, then we become more responsive, and we say things like, I didn't like how that sounded. I'm not going to tolerate that anymore, and I'm going to walk out of the room until you've calmed down and let me know when you're ready to talk again. That takes a lot of work for some people who have learned to react to every situation in their life. And guess what? Business owner, successful attorney, financial advisor, fill in the blank, this serves you in business too. When you can have a more responsive space inside of you, you're a better leader, you're a better decision maker, you're a better everything. And so oftentimes the work in our rooms, it gets kind of like the domino, effect, or it permeates other areas of our life, because we say it all the time, how we do one thing, we do all things.
I was just about to say that. It's like your go-to line, but it's so true.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes even when you get to a place of peace where you are able to not become reactive and you are able to accept what somebody else is doing and walk away from it, it can be extremely peaceful for yourself to be able to sit in that moment and feel that, especially when you've never experienced it before. And then I think, sometimes on the receiving ends, the other person like is trying to get something out of you. But also I think sometimes people observing what that looks like, it can be like, oh, like they're avoiding it, or right, like how are they not bothered by that? But I think that's also emulating like what doing the work truly looks like, because yes, can that person still be frustrated by the situation? Sure, but they're able to handle it and be able to let go of what they can't control and seeing what it looks like to truly walk in healing.
Mm-hmm. Right, and not allow themselves to be activated by somebody else's dysfunction. That's what a lot of our work is. How do you sit with yourself while somebody else is having problems? We're so used to oftentimes in relationships when they are dysfunctional to be enmeshed or be connected to other people's pain, tethered to it. And that's not health. That's not healing. And sometimes that's even how relationships come together. I can save him. I can rescue her. And so a lot of times our work is dismantling how this relationship originally connected.
And going back to, right, all the way to the childhood aspect, right? Were they saving? Were they rescuing? Were they observing that in their parent dynamics and different things growing up too?
And that's it. That's the work, because it is, right? Our nervous system wants what we experienced. And if our relationships with our caregivers early on taught us that we have to abandon ourselves at the sake of others, well, that's what we're doing in relationships until we grow that awareness and we heal. If our relationships taught us that I can't trust people, I need to protect myself, well, then you don't share yourself. You're not emotionally vulnerable. And that becomes toxic in relationships. And so there's this push-pull that happens, or, I abandon, you pursue, right? And I avoid, you emotionally react. And we repeat these patterns. Absolutely.
And until you truly sit in it and reflect on it, it's really hard to even identify that. I think this week I had a woman in my room, and she's processing and working through codependency and seeing what that looks like for her. And we were doing a genogram, and I was able to kind of point out where her codependency started for her. And she was like, oh, I didn't even ever like think about that or notice that, right? She thought it started when she entered romantic relationships, but it was way before that.
Way to do the work with her. That's really powerful. And it's awesome when people can see that, because so much shame comes into our rooms when people think like, I chose this person because I knew what I was getting into, or I'm the bad person because of everything that's happened. When we can bring it back to, well, wait a second, you learned to do this somewhere way back when, before you knew what it was. There starts to be a little bit more compassion for self, and then there even starts to be some self-forgiveness. My client, if he watches this, he'll love this. He's like, you can share this. He told me this yesterday. He learned when he was in treatment for alcohol that the way he started building compassion for his parents is like, hey, if you had 2 cups of flour, sugar, and vanilla, and you were ready to bake a cake, and I had 2 cups of sugar, vanilla, and 1 cup of flour, our cakes are going to look different. We have different ingredients, but we're still trying to make the cake. And what the point of that was is he said, I learned then that they had what they had. They didn't have anything else. My dad had 2 cups of sugar. My mom had 2 cups of flour. It was what it was. Dad's was sweeter. Mom's was more bland. It wasn't because they didn't want to be the best cake. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the ingredients. And I think that allowing your client to understand, like, this happened because of experiences you had early on, and you brought what you brought to this relationship because all you had was 2 cups of flour. It starts to elevate some understanding inside of us that, like, hey, the people around us that taught us to be like this didn't know what they were doing, and now we didn't know what we were doing, and now we can shift the tide.
Yeah. And sometimes I think naturally, before you get to the place of acceptance, it can sometimes bring up anger, resentment, or other feelings that sometimes a lot of people don't want to feel, especially when it's of caregivers that maybe have passed away or different dynamics. It can be really hard for them to feel those feelings.
You know, that's a really powerful point, because that is part of the work too, right? Is that we go back and we sit with those parts of us that didn't get to feel those experiences because we were in survival mode. We didn't feel safe to experience those, whatever it was. Those are important features of this work too, to go back. And the benefit pertaining to this conversation of a partner who is also doing the work alongside of you, they can then be that reflection of security back. To be able to sit in a room with a couple, it's amazing, and be able to see a husband or a male partner say to their wife after they've had tons of dysfunction around men and relationships, be able to say, oh my gosh, that was really painful for you. I didn't know that that's how you experienced that. To be seen and validated in relationship like that is something that's, it's magical.
Well, right, like being able to see each other grow through those experiences, but being able to see each other be vulnerable and be safe to each other, and allowing each other to like be able to be like transparent, like you're seeing every single part of each other, and there's an essence where that can be extremely vulnerable, and intimacy is vulnerable too, but being able to sit in that room and experience what you see with those clients and the transparency they have is like, in a sense, a whole new level.
Well, right. And it's offering them exactly what they needed for those parts, right? And so that's an important feature of the work that we get to do, is understanding that if we're not looking, if relationships aren't about happiness, they're about transformation, we're healing each other by being our best selves and by offering parts of ourselves that like maybe we never saw before in previous relationships. And then kids benefit too.
Yeah. How do you feel like navigating, I guess we're kind of talking about when like separation or divorce or those feelings are coming up and not really getting to that stage yet. Kids still have feelings, they still sense things and the dynamics that are happening within a household. So I guess maybe touching on like what that looks like a little bit.
Yeah, and that's your frame of reference, right? From not only a personal experience but your professional work too, kids in transition, right? It's ignorant of us to think that our kids aren't experiencing the shifts in our home. Maybe they're not saying anything, maybe their behavior isn't revealing any change, but I don't care how great people are at masking or hiding, kids feel the difference in a home. And so it's inevitable that children are impacted by this experience. What we like to do here is name those experiences, and maybe not completely, maybe developmentally it's appropriate to just say mom and dad are struggling with X, Y, and Z, or maybe not at all. We're having a disagreement and things are really rough between us right now, but at least there's a name and it's not left to the child to understand, because typically what happens in our humanness is when nobody names it and we're not talking about it, we make it personal. And so a kid might be inside of themselves saying things like, what did I do wrong that dad's not talking to mom? Or what did I do wrong that mommy's in her room crying? Those are experiences that our children then start to personalize, and then they carry that with them everywhere they go. And so it's absolutely imperative that as we think about this process, first and foremost, never stay together for children. That's not. But let's be mindful that like divorce and separation impacts everyone. So if you are staying because of children, I understand that as a mom, and I understand that that sometimes is your initial motivation. Doing the work is part of the process to helping heal the family system. And that's what part of this work allows us to do, is be more honest with ourselves and our family members.
And I think, right, even like allowing space for when you have those open and transparent conversations with your kids, or letting them know developmentally what's appropriate for them, also allows them to ask questions to allow them not to personalize it. Doesn't mean you have to answer every question, but it allows some open space and open communication. But I also think there's an element too where sometimes as parents, as you're navigating those things, you sometimes even can tend to go to your kids. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot that can be really hard for kids. So making sure, like, as parents, that, like, you are having your own support system, whether that's therapy, whether that's mentors, whether it's friendships, like, those are the people that are on your level or above your level that are safe for you to go to. But when you go below your level and you go to your kids, I don't even think sometimes parents realize how much damage it can do to your children.
Would you say more about that? Because that's an interesting feature of this conversation, right? Because it does hurt everyone. And so even if you are in a place and you're like, I can't handle this anymore, I don't want to be in this relationship, but we have nowhere else to go. I have couples that are living in different rooms right now, or that they're trying to survive the economic situation they're in, or they're waiting for their income tax return to come in, or whatever situations they meet. In the meantime, they're leaking toxicity or poison, and that's what I hear you saying. So tell me what that sounds like so that our listeners could actually hear themselves back.
Sorry. That could look like a mom going to a daughter and saying, right, like, should I leave daddy? Like, should we get up and like move? And I think there is a level of like desperation for that like mom in that moment that she is going to her daughter, but the weight that puts on that child, because also, right, like you said, internalizing as a kid, they go to a level of like, if they say yes or they say no, right, like everything that happens after that is now their fault. Until they have the tools and different things to figure out and navigate that wasn't their fault, right, and that question should have never been put on them or asked, right? But everything leading after that, they do leave. Oh my gosh, like I'm the reason why my family's torn apart, or I'm the reason that this happened, or you stay and it's really dysfunctional. I'm the reason why mom stayed. I'm the reason mom and dad fight all the time.
Wow. Yeah, and I can imagine in a reactionary space, people do say things like, dad's being a, and fill in the blank, or I don't want to be here anymore, or I'm leaving. And right, what you're saying is that we've got to be careful and regulate ourselves, because if we're using our children, weaponizing them, using them as bait, or just like a blanket to feel security, they're not capable of handling that.
No. And right, they don't even know how to always express themselves. So you don't even know that a child could be wearing some of that because they don't even know how to vocalize it sometimes, right? You just notice it sometimes in their behavior or the quietness, and you're navigating all this chaos. Sometimes it's even hard to navigate what they're navigating or name what they're navigating. But also too, I think that there's a level where your child is made up of you and your partner. So even when you sometimes bring some of those comments or big feelings to your children, like you're talking about half of them. So it also can, in a sense, be attacking them or their character or who they are, because they do have characteristic traits of that partner, right, that you're really struggling with, that you're naming all these really bad things that you don't like about them.
Yeah. And we're not even talking about the blendedness where maybe there's a step and not biological connection. That creates a whole nother layer, right? Because what I see in those situations is that it's easier to take sides in that situation, right? Take the side of the biological parent rather than the step parent. And then that's really hard to repair, and it causes a lot of damage. Yeah, so as we're considering where this podcast will go, because I think there's a lot more to unpack, right? We are talking about the possibility of divorce, what that looks like, the possibility of repair, what that looks like, and how to sit with this as you consider. And so as we're just wrapping up, I think it's really important to maybe make a couple like really just powerful statements, and that's that about 50% of marriages are ending in divorce right now. And the statistics are showing that new marriages after divorce have even more likelihood of ending in divorce, which is emphasizing exactly what we're talking about today, right? That if you don't do the work, you will repeat it in future relationships. And so that's that very powerful piece of the work that we get to do here. That divorce affects everybody, and the grass is not greener. Again, I think it's important to make sure we're not saying if you are in a marriage that is violent, you are not safe. There is a partner that's unwilling to change, chronic abuse, chronic addiction, chronic cheating. These are not scenarios we're talking about right now, but maybe there has been betrayal in the past or addiction in the past, and there's a willingness to get help. It is my encouragement as a couples therapist to do the work inside of session. It might require a temporary separation. It might require some hard work, but it's worth it in the long run for all the things we've talked about today. And so I think, Callie, as we're continuing to process this, we just need to maybe start some podcasts about like what would it look like if we went all the way through the divorce and walked through all those scenarios. what would it look like if you repaired, and what this relationship could look like and change the family system, and then everything in between. So we're going to land this here, and I'm going to ask you to comment or react to this, telling us what it is that you feel is important, what you heard today, or maybe what you want to hear, because it's likely that it's impacting you. And it certainly impacted us. And so we're here passionate, professionally, but personally as well, to encourage you to do the deeper work. And so always we end this podcast with reminding you that we do free initial consultation calls, 15 minutes. Just call. What's the harm in finding out if this work is for you? If you're having any of these thoughts, it's important that you just challenge yourself to think deeper about them. Visit us at rootedtherapies.org. Watch a few podcasts. Get connected to us through social media. Don't deny yourself the opportunity if something touched you today. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Callie, for always just extracting the most amazing conversations. And we'll see you next time.